Welcome to our Shield of the Sun video. This is Vince McMahon, part 3. In 1994, Hogan and Vince were no longer friends, but enemies, and the only traditional wrestling promoters left were in their stronghold called WCW, and that is why Hogan went to work for them. And the traditionalists, having that Southern never say die mentality, were not done fighting Vince and seeking revenge, and this time they had huge weapons in the form of Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff, who, while working for their boss and Vince's main rival Ted Turner, they almost put Vince's company out of business by throwing his art form style back at him, and even more darker than his, which captured the immoral audience's attention, that it forced Vince to change and adapt his company to a much darker image. And at the end of the Monday Night Wars, Vince's company prevailed again and drove the WCW out of business, and he bought his competition for $5 million. Vince has destroyed the lives of a lot of wrestlers and their families, and the lives of people we probably never even heard of. He is in truth an evil man, and only his own company and his own brainwashed employees and his own fake family have tried to tell people different, but they are lying, and they're also acting, which makes it worse. The Illuminati did actually orchestrate the Monday Night Wars to corrupt Generation X to the fullest, and the world to a life of depravity and embracing rebellion. Vince in the wrestling business is satanic to the core, and they also kill Christian wrestlers and set them up, like Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, two men who are not perfect, who is, but also not one of them either. They got into that business on raw talent and skill, and they were persecuted for it, and they were also real heroes. Many people started to open their eyes to Vince after what is called the Montreal Screwjob, which was a heated controversial event that took place at a pay-per-view event called the Survivor Series in Montreal, Canada in 1997. Most of what the people know about the event is true. Vince, using Shawn Michaels and the referee Earl Hebner, were in on a setup to snatch away the World Championship belt from Bret Hart without him knowing about that. They collectively swindled the world title from him, as a lot of people in the company were in on it. A lot of the story is well known, but what does not get talked about was the end result of that night. After Bret was swindled, Vince, along with his son Shane, went backstage to have a talk with Bret in the locker room. When Vince walked in, Bret violently punched Vince in the side of his face, knocking him to the floor and bruising his eye. This was not the first time Bret assaulted Vince. One time he knocked him down in the middle of the ring by pushing him flat, and another time he knocked his headphones off when he was announcing. These altercations were not planned per se, but resulted as actions done in the heat of the moment. Bret's discontent with Vince started when Bret was told it was time to step down. Bret would not do that, and several times he sought certain storylines that were being denied him. Soon the company wanted Bret sold to WCW, and this made Bret feel used and unappreciated, and often he took out his frustration on WWF fans and Vince McMahon. When Bret punched Vince in the face that night and released a videotape of a private conversation he had with Vince, which caught Vince lying to Bret about his intentions that night, this exposure and feud caused Vince to swear revenge. Satanists like to wait before getting revenge, sometimes even years. Vince waited until 1999 at a pay-per-view called Over the Edge. On that night, Vince set up an accident by having Owens' harness sabotaged, causing him to fall to his death in front of a live audience. Vince killed Bret's brother Owen as payback for the actions he felt Bret did to him. Bret himself was not killed because, for one, he is a member of the Baphomet of wrestling, he is a Satanist and was used by the Illuminati, and also he is a national Canadian hero. So in retrospect, killing Bret would not be smart for Vince to do, so instead he killed his brother, who was mostly innocent to that world. Bret knew why Owen was killed, and he keeps it quiet in the same manner that Kurt Angle keeps quiet about the death of Chris Benoit, and why he does not want to work for Vince anymore. Bret did come back not that long ago to again work for the WWE, but that was more for his love of wrestling, which coming back had to have been hard for him, but being hard is what Bret is good at, just like Vince is clever at killing people. After the Montreal incident, Vince started to portray himself into the storylines as a bad guy whose character was like Satan incarnated. This character was not a stretch for Vince. It is a real Vince McMahon live on TV, and the Illuminati and every insider knows it. but the fans still can't wrap their minds around it, even though Vince shows them time and time again how sick he is through that character. Currently, the WWE has expanded their secret market activities with the Mafia to include pornography, and many of the divas of the WWE are or were porn stars and Playboy models, and this sick practice has added sleaze being passed off as talent. Vince and his brood of Illuminati blue bloods are still evil and still corrupting in an unapologetic fashion. The most noted feud storylines of the WWE when it was the WWF was the Austin McMahon feud. This feud was so hugely popular that it had a horrible and real influence on the population. The feud played on our emotions regarding corruption and evil bosses in society. It made people, too, in real life to violently attack and even shoot their boss or anyone they felt crossed them, being inspired by the likes of Stone Cold Steve Austin, who became a folk hero for all the wrong reasons during the feud. Austin heavily related with the fans on the outside of it, but really he was influencing them to engage in violent, drunken behavior, which was already bad enough, and he became a hero among people looking for an anti-Christian spirituality. People are so convinced that the feud was real in some way that they will vehemently argue that disillusional thinking most often. That is because the WWE at the time did their job all too well. Satan chose Austin like he did with Hogan to greatly influence U.S. kids, preteens, teenagers, college kids, and even immature adults and the millions and millions around the world to be inspired by a satanic hero, aka anti-hero. Austin was chosen to lead the company's storylines as a world champion in a time where the people became more desirous for more twisted and bloodier matches and for sinister, immoral, and hauntingly near-realistic storylines. Hogan, through the NWO gimmick in WCW, by turning bad guy, changed the business over to a more extreme image and to twist his storylines and to promote the real NWO in this world. McMahon, knowing the change was coming, prepped Austin to be the one to take what Hogan did, but make a cause out of it that people could relate to, because the people had generally become New Agers. McMahon was willing to be put out there for Austin to beat on and humiliate, because he served the Illuminati and was fighting to keep his company alive, to make sure that he came out on top in the long run regarding his product. It will be noted that McMahon and the WWE wrestlers have done many charitable things, but that does not excuse the evils of his company and of himself. Evil, murderous men throughout history have done charitable things. Even Cain did that at times. They do that to be sanctimonious and not repentant or sincere. Some of the other wrestlers may be sincere, and some generally are, but the McMahon family is another story. They do that to throw the public off. At the end of the day, they view their fans as mice caught to a cheese trap, and they view discerned Christians as eggheads, and they use many of their wrestlers' characters to blaspheme Jesus Christ, like Austin and their stories are New Age ancient Roman spirituality, where the wrestlers represent gods and goddesses, and their champion would be their king at the time, for this is the core spirituality, the true muse of the blinding effects the WWE offers in their shows, like pyrotechnics, flashing light, booming theme music, half-naked women, and twisted and disturbing acts of depravity for all the world to consume. This ends our video for part 3.